Hi everyone. In this video of Accelerated Chess Dragon, we're going to be looking at another chess opening, and this is the French defense, the Burn variation of the French. So without further ado, let's look at this opening. White will start off by playing e4, and black will play e6. White will go d4, and now black will play d5, and white plays knight c3. And this is pretty similar to the Rubinstein variation, where black will usually play d takes e4, and then knight d7, bishop d7, and develop that way. But here, black is going to prolong d takes e4 by playing a move first, and that is knight f6. White will now pin the knight on f6 with bishop g5, and now black will take on e4, white will take on e4, and now white is obviously threatening either bishop or knight takes f6, which would severely ruin black's pawn structure. But in most cases of the French defense, it's actually okay as black to have a ruined pawn structure, because it gives you lots of opportunities to play f5, and even if the king side is not going to be very good to castle, you can always castle queen side as black, and the open file for your rook is going to be quite nifty. And here black has two moves. One of them is bishop e7, and another is knight bd7. If knight bd7 is played, then white will just play knight f3 and continue development, and here black has two moves, h6 and bishop to e7. If you play bishop to e7, then white will just play knight f6 check, and now black has bishop takes f6, and here white can play h4. And now black has three moves to consider. One is castles, another one is c5, and the third one is h6. If you go for castles as black, then white will just continue development, bishop d3, c5 by black, queen to e2, c takes d4, and now queen e4. Now, preparing to capture the d4 pawn, but under better circumstances. But also threatening the h7 pawn with checkmate. Black plays g6, protecting that, and now white castles queenside. And here, black takes the opportunity to defend the d4 pawn by playing the move e5. White trades on f6, and now plays bishop to b5. The obvious threat is to play bishop takes d7, and then after bishop takes d7, white will capture the e5 pawn, and with that e5 pawn gone, it's going to be very hard to defend the d4 pawn, if not impossible, and hence white would just be up an extra pawn. Black plays rook to d8, and here white definitely could play the move bishop d7, and then play queen takes e5, but white instead decides to wait a bit and plays rook h1. Black goes for king g7, and instead of yet again capturing the knight, white plays h5. He's just playing a waiting game and getting ready to make positional weaknesses in black's camp, then only take advantage of them. And here, black plays rook to e8, trying to defend the e5 pawn, but unfortunately, white can just capture the d4 pawn, because if you play e takes d4, then obviously you lose your rook to queen takes e8. And in general, white's position should definitely be way better than black's. White has more development than black. The knight on d7 and the bishop on c8, and even the rook on a8 are the pieces that aren't really doing much. Whereas if you consider white's development, all of white's pieces are doing something. So that was castles. Another move you could consider is c5. But after c5 is played, white will play queen d2, and black will take on d4. And here white will take back with the knight. And here black has two moves, h6 and castles. If you castle, then white will castle queenside, h6 by black, and now white will play knight f3. And this is a very nice move because it's basically saying that if you play the move h takes g5 as black, then white is just comfortable playing the move h takes g5. And what is this move doing? Well, it's just opened up the h-file, and with ideas like queen to d3, maybe eventually transferring the queen over to h3, and putting all of the pressure along this open h-file. But instead of playing the move castles, you could also go h6 as black and immediately try to kick the bishop away. White will capture on f6, black will capture with the knight, and white will play queen to b4. And the idea of queen b4 is obviously to try and stop the black king from castling, but it's also to try getting other white pieces involved into the attack, like bishop b5 check, and etc, etc. Black plays knight d5, and white plays the move queen a3, still preventing black from castling, and now black offers a trade of queens with queen e7. And this makes sense. Obviously, if you can trade the queens off, then maybe black would get a favorable endgame. But white is instead going to play bishop b5 check. And this is ensuring that black is not going to castle Black plays the move bishop d7, and white captures on d7 with check. And here, black plays an interesting move. You could just play queen takes d7 and capture the bishop, and then after, say, queenside castle by white, you could just wait and then castle eventually, like playing the queen back to e7, and then trying to eventually trade the queens off, and then finally castle as black. But instead, black plays the move king takes d7. And this is a bit too risky considering the fact that the king is still stuck in the center, and it's very vulnerable to all attacks that white has. White plays queen a4 check, and now black brings the king back to c7. And now white plays rook to h3. A very nice rook lift, which enables this rook to go towards the black king. a6 by black, trying to prevent moves like knight b5 in the future, and rook b3. Queen c5, and now white castles queenside, just trying to bring more pieces into the attack. b5 by black, and here queen a5 check by white. Black plays queen b6, and white plays queen e1. Black plays king b7, and white goes queen e2. At the moment, the threat is knight takes b5, and after a takes b5, rook takes b5, because then the queen would be pinned towards the black king. So black plays king a7, but I encourage you to pause the video and find out how white will still win this game. Okay, so white will actually play the move knight takes b5 check. And regardless of whether the king is on b7 or a7, the combination is still the same. So a takes b5, rook takes b5, and here black tries the move queen c6. Now, obviously, there are tons of threats towards black's king, and if you don't do anything at the moment, then black has ways of consolidating and maybe getting threats on white's king. So that's when white plays the crushing move, and this is what I wanted you to spot when you played the move knight takes b5 check. So what will white do now after he plays rook takes b5? Okay, so white will play the move rook d takes d5. Black will now play e takes d5, and if you don't do anything, then you are just down 2 pawns, and the rooks are going to infiltrate quite easily. So that is why black must take the rook on d5, but now white plays queen e7 check. The idea was to open the e file up so white's queen could use some of the squares there. And now after king a6, white plays the move rook b3, and here black can essentially resign. There's no way of defending checkmate. This queen is obviously threatening to play queen a3 check, and if you try to defend that with something like queen a4, then white can always checkmate you this way. And this is checkmate. That is why instead of playing the move c5, you could also play the move h6. But if h6 is played, then white will trade the bishops, play queen d2, and now b6 by black. Castles queenside, bishop b7, knight e5, just normal development. Castles, bishop d3, and now c5. D takes c5, and here we have queen c7. Attacking the knight, but also threatening to win the c5 pawn. Rook he1, defend the knight this way. And here bishop g2. Capturing the pawn, but now white is preparing a very strong attack. And if there's a game that you could follow to see this very exact variation, then it's Viswanathan Anand versus Viktor Korchnoi in 2000. So after bishop takes g2 is played, rook to e2 by Anand, and Korchnoi plays king to h8, knowing that his adversary's rook is going to enter the g file, and with that a very strong attack will follow. So rook to g1, bishop d5, and here instead of capturing the pawn on b6, Anand still decides to play the move queen f4. And it doesn't matter if he's going to lose material, it's just that the attack is going to occur so quickly. Now obviously you cannot play b takes c5, because if you do, then knight g6 check, and that is a queen on c7 that is lost. So that is why queen takes c5 was forced by Korchnoi. And rook to e3 by Anand. Threatening the move rook takes g7, and then follow up with rook g3 check, and in that case, Korchnoi is lost. And after this rook e3 move was played, he actually resigned the game, because if he plays something like queen e7 to defend the knight on f6, rook takes g7, and if you don't capture the rook, then the h6 pawn is free to capture. King takes g7 is forced, and now after rook g3 check, the king would have to go back to h8. Or you could block with knight g4, but it doesn't change anything. So queen h6 check, knight h7, and after queen takes h7, this is checkmate. Hence, after the move rook to e3 was played, unproportionally resigned, and it's a very nice victory for Anand. Instead of playing the move bishop to e7, you can just play the move h6. And after h6 is played, white will capture the knight on f6 with check. Black will take the knight on f6, and now white will take on f6, black will take on f6, and bishop b5 check. c6 and bishop to d3, trying to provoke a bit of weaknesses around the king. Bishop to d6 by black, queen e2, and here black has two moves, castling and bishop to d7. If bishop d7 is played, then white will play c3, black will castle queenside, white will castle kingside, and after c5 and knight e5, white's initiative is definitely very good. You can imagine that a move like f4 will soon be played, and this knight has a very good grip on the e5 square. So instead of playing the move bishop d7, you could also consider castling, but if you castle, then just white has two moves to consider, castling queenside or just castling kingside. And if you castle kingside, then after c5, dc5, bishop c5, and c3, white's attack is definitely going very well. Soon maybe he can get ideas like queen e4, maybe centralize the rook to d1, and eventually somehow get a rook lift, and the rook on that third rank would be very powerful. You could also just castle queenside, which would allow c5, dc5, bishop c5, and queen e4. Essentially the same thing, but white just castles on opposite sides. So that was the move knight bd7. But black could also go bishop to e7 and just unpin this way. So white would capture on f6, and here black has two moves, bishop f6 or gf6. If g takes f6 is played, then white is going to play the move knight f3, and black has three moves, a6, b6, and f5. And if f5 is played, then knight c3, bishop to f6, queen d2, and c5, trying to challenge the d4 pawn. White plays d5, and now black has two moves, castles and e takes d5. If you play e takes d5, then after knight d5, bishop b2, rook d1, white is getting a lot of development, and after a couple of more moves, we can see that white would definitely stand better, and we'll even see a nice tactic in this position. So rook fe1, rook c8, and now knight g5. Obviously, there's a threat towards the e6 bishop, so black tries to defend. So knight e6, fe6, and rook takes e6. And this is the tactic, because if black plays the move rook takes e6, then white will just go knight c7. And here, white is completely winning. I mean, he's going to capture this e6 rook, and if you don't do anything, then obviously after the rook is captured, the queen and rook would be forked. But not only that, it would also attack this king on g8 because the bishop is still on c4. And this would allow too many discoveries, and let's just say that it wouldn't end well for black if he captured the rook on e6. So instead, we have the move just king h8, and after a trade of rooks, knight c7, bishop to e5, black is in a very bad position. Queen h6 by white, and here black is actually unable to capture the knight on c7 with both bishop or queen. If you capture with either piece, it really doesn't matter. Then white will just play the move rook takes d7. There's not only an attack towards the h7 pawn, but there's an attack towards the f8 rook, and there's a threat of queen g7 checkmate as well. And you can't defend all three checkmates, so black is essentially lost here. So that is why black will play rook f6, white will go queen g5. And now, if you play bishop takes c7, then there's just rook takes d7. And the idea isn't necessarily that you're going to win the rook, but it's to just get checkmate like this. And if you play the move queen takes d7, it's essentially the same thing. Rook takes d7, and after queen takes d7, it's just a checkmate on g8. So that is why this doesn't work, and instead why black is now forced into desperation. Bishop takes h2 check. And now king takes h2 by white. And here, black gets a capture with a check, which is probably very good for black until you notice that this isn't really doing much. After queen takes d7 check, white will just play the move king back to g1, and black hasn't really achieved much. And we'll notice that in a few more moves, black is completely lost. And here, black is unable to really find a move. There's a threat of checkmate on the g8 square. And if you play rook f8 or rook g6 to guard it, then white will just play queen e7 and black is already lost. This threat is quite annihilating. This threat is also quite annihilating. And it doesn't seem like black has any way of really responding to those threats. So that is why black out of desperation, plays queen d8, but now white can just win with a very easy tactic, so I encourage you to pause the video and find out what white can play. Okay, so the correct move is just rook takes d7. It's a very easy tactic to see. First of all, the rook is losing another defender, but not only that, there's no way to really capture the rook and also defend the g8 square at once. So that is why this position is completely lost and why black has to just resign here. So that is why you shouldn't really play e takes d5, but another move that you could try is just to castle. And this may seem risky because the king is completely open, but it's not as dangerous as it seems. Queenside castle, and now e5. And black is actually having a very nice threat in mind. And I encourage you to see what the threat is. If white plays a move like bishop c4 and doesn't acknowledge what the threat is, then what will black play here? Okay, so black will actually play the move e4, and the idea is that if you're moving this knight away anywhere, like to e1, then black will just play bishop g5. And it's attacking the queen, but also it's pinning the queen towards the king. And unfortunately, as white, you can never play f4 because black has this e takes f3 en passant move. And after this, white is essentially lost, and he must resign here. So that is why you must be aware of your opponent's threats, and why after h4, the threat is buried. Now, obviously, if you play the move e4, then white can just go knight g5, or he could just move his knight away, because the h4 pawn guards the g5 square. So after h4 is played, black will develop, and after d6, knight b6, queen e3, threatening the c5 pawn. And here we have e4 by black, attacking the knight on f3. White plays knight g5, and after knight g5, black plays the move bishop d7, just developing. And here, white plays the move g4, trying to weaken the pawns around black's king, because he knows that it's very easy to attack, so why not do it this way? And here, this is where the mistake happens, and this just allows too much initiative for white afterwards. Black plays the move bishop d4, and I encourage you to pause the video and find out how white can just win here. Okay, so white will just play rook takes d4, sacrificing the exchange, but so that there's no way for that black bishop to remain on the powerful h8 a1 diagonal. So c takes d4, queen takes d4, and now f6 by black. And here white plays bishop c4 check. And it is true that you could capture the bishop on c4, which is what black does, but after queen c4, you'll notice that after this knight comes to e6, there is just too much attack. Black must play king g7 if he wants to keep the exchange, because if you go king h8, then knight s7 check and you've lost the exchange. Then it's white who's in the lead materialistically. So black must play king g7, but white plays knight e6 check, and this forces a trade of minor pieces. So bishop e6, queen e6, and even though white is down the exchange, if you just look at the potential attack that he has, there's no way that black can really respond to this. So instead of playing the move f5, black could also go for b6. Now if b6 is played, then white will play bishop c4, bishop d7 by black, queen e2, c6, and now castles queenside, just getting ready for an attack. Queen c7, rook h1, knight d7, king b1, queenside castle, and after bishop a6, a trade of bishops, and now king to b8, the queen retreats back, and after c3, knight f8, and g3, white's not really going to play an attacking game at the moment, but he's going to just get ready for anything positionally. And white would stand better here because of the double pawns that black has on the f-file. And in general, white would just have a slight advantage, and he could easily convert that into a bigger one. The last move that we can look at instead of playing f5 or b6 is the move a6. And if a6 is played, then white will play queen e2, black will go b5, queenside castles. Bishop d7, queen e3, f5, knight c5, and now bishop to d5. Taking on c5 could also work, but after d takes c5, the lines that get opened up are quite hard to cover, so it's better to do it this way. Bishop d5. Cover the holes up first. Knight to e5, and now knight c6 by black. And white could definitely play a knight into the d7 square, but there wouldn't really be any point of doing that, and it wouldn't really be that useful. So instead, knight takes c6. Bishop takes c6, and bishop to e2. sacrificing the g2 pawn, but enabling white to get a very huge initiative after that. Bishop takes g2, rook hg1, bishop to d5, and now bishop to h5. And here, white is completely better. If you haven't noticed yet, white is threatening the move knight takes e6, and he's already getting a very strong attack on his hands. Black plays bishop c5, getting rid of the powerful knight on c5. White plays dc5, and after queen e7, I encourage you to pause the video and find out how white will just crush black here. So white will play the move rook takes d5, and after rook takes d5 is played, there's e takes d5. But now white will play bishop takes f7 check. This is completely winning because it's trying to expose the position of the black king. Now, if you play the move king takes f7 as black, then white will just go rook g7 check, king takes g7, and now after queen takes e7 check, white is just going to win all of the pawns on black's end, and then after he wins all of those, he just has a bunch of passed pawns that he can easily push. You might be wondering, why does black have to capture the bishop on f7 though? Well, let's look at more moves that black can play. If king f8 is played, then white will just go queen h6 check, black will capture the bishop, and after rook g7 check, king can move back either square, and now rook e7 check, king takes e7, and after queen c6, you're guaranteed to lose either this pawn or this pawn, and black has already lost here. On the other hand, if you play the move king to d8, then white will just play the move queen d4. He's not necessarily trying to attack the h8 rook, but he's indirectly trying to attack the a8 rook. So let's say this rook moves to f8. Now white will play queen takes d5 check, and after you block with the queen, queen takes a8 check, king to e7, and now let's say queen d5, rook takes queen to e5 check. Black is completely lost now, because after king to f8, rook to d1, white is getting a lot of initiative, and there's really no way that black can prevent all of this. So the question remains here, what about the move king to d7? Well, it's the exact same reason why king to d8 wasn't good. Queen d4 will be played, and after this bishop is captured with queen takes f7, then white goes rook g7. And obviously, if you capture this, and after queen takes g7, king c6, white will just play the move b4, and after this, he's defending the c5 pawn, and there's an easy way that white can just win all of these pawns on the king side and the queen side for black, and white will just be easily winning. So bishop takes f7 check just crushes black instantly. That is why instead of playing the move g takes f6, black should just play bishop takes f6. And if you go for bishop f6, then white will play knight f3, black will go knight d7, queen d2 by white, castles by both sides, and now two moves that black can try. Bishop e7 and b6. If b6 is played, then white goes bishop d3, black will play bishop to b7, h4 by white, bishop e7, queen e2, knight f6, and here knight eg5. Queen d6 by black, and now king to b1. We have c5, dc5, queen c5, and now knight e5. And we can see that there are threats like knight e takes f7, followed by queen takes e6. The rook on f8 is not going to be able to defend all of the black weaknesses in black's camp. So this is just going to be very easy for white to take advantage of. And here black plays rook a c8, but this allows white another very crushing tactic. And I encourage you to pause the video and try finding it. Okay, so white should play the move knight to d7. And what this move does is that it's trying to tempt the f6 knight to leave the defense of the h7 pawn so that you could capture the d7 knight. But white isn't just giving the knight up for free. After knight d7, he's going to play bishop takes h7 check, unleashing a discovery towards the d7 knight, but also, after king h8, rook takes d7, he wins a pawn, and if you try playing this bishop takes g5 move, to, after h takes g5, capture this bishop, then that's not possible because the bishop is defended via this rook on h1. And black is essentially hopeless now, and he has no way of surviving anymore. So that is why the line would continue, bishop takes g2, queen h5, and here black has already a lost position. He tries g6, but now we have bishop g6 check, king g7, check on h7, king to f6, and now bishop to e4. Bishop takes h1, queen h6 check, king e5, and now f4 check. King takes f4, and now knight takes e6 check. And the point of this is that if you capture this bishop in e4, queen f4 is checkmate. And also, if you don't, then you're just allowing your king to be chased all over the board. So if you go king to g3, then what will white do? Well, he'll just play queen f4 check. And after king h3, just go rook d3 check. The king is very exposed, and once you play queen e3, white will take the queen and bishop f3. And this is obviously lost already after king h4, and now the move queen to h3 checkmate. So that is why it is not really advisable to play the move b6, but you could also go for bishop to e7. If bishop e7 is played, then bishop d3, c5, knight c5, knight c5, dc5, and here black plays queen d5. You might be wondering why black doesn't just take on c5, and that's because white has bishop h7 check. King takes h7, queen takes d8, rook takes d8, and after all of this is said and done, white is coming up with an extra exchange. So that doesn't work, and instead black plays queen d5, preparing to not only capture the a2 pawn, but also the c5 pawn. King d1, queen takes c5, h4, getting an attack ready, b6, knight g5, threatening the h7 pawn, h6, check on h7, king to h8, and now bishop to e4. Now if you play h takes g5, then black is going to lose the rook on a8, but also get the h-file completely opened up. So rook to b8, queen to f4, threatening the rook on b8, bishop to b7, defending the rook with this rook on f8, bishop b7, rook b7, and now queen e4. Not only threatening the move queen to h7 check, but also threatening the rook on b7. And there's no way to defend both threats, so black plays bishop takes g5. And after queen takes b7, even though black is down the exchange, you could still consider black having some compensation, because this bishop on g5 can later be transferred to f6, and followed by some moves like queen e5, getting ready to attack the b2 pawn. It may not actually be as bad as it seems for black. So after queen takes b7 is played, this is the end of the French defense Burn variation. And I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please let me know in the comment section, and stay tuned for more chess.